Once upon a time, the Mulgrins lived in peace. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Peace ended when the violent sun bodies invaded the valley.
What?
Peace ended when the violent sun bodies invaded the valley. Once upon a time, the Mulgrins lived in peace. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Peace ended when the violent sun bodies invaded the valley. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Once upon a time, and as the heads roll, the valley was taken, but then began the battle of the peace ended when the violent sun bodies invaded the valley.
Guess I'm doing it wrong, or it's not in the right order. Not sure how we're supposed to light these candles.
Ended with the battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of those. Start the fire, and then the screaming people, the blade, the tree, and the monster. That looks like the last one to me. I just can't tell about this one, but it's got to be the tree. Oh, this is matchsticks? Okay, I didn't even notice that. I thought it was a banner. Okay.
Once upon a time, and as the heads roll, the time of the vogue, the valley was taken, but then began the battle end. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley.
So that's not it.
Once upon a time, and as the heads rolled, the valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading.
What? Okay, it's this one's first.
Once upon a time, the Mowgli,
This one.
and as the heads roll, the valley was taken, but then began the battle of. Peace ended when the violent somebodies
faster.
invaded the valley.
Okay, let's do this real quick.
Once upon, and as the heads roll, the valley was taken.
Do try again. That was new, but
Once upon, and as the head, the valley was taken. The battle ended. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the once. And as the heads, the valley was the battle. Peace ended when the once upon a time. And as the heads rolled. That's not the way the story plays. Once upon a time, and as the heads rolled, the valley, the peace ended when the violent somebodies once upon, and as the heads rolled, the valley was taken. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley.
okay, that one's staying lit. So
Once upon a time, and as the valley was taken, but then the battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading.
I don't get it. I'm doing it in right order. Fire, head, blade, tree, monster. Let's look back more. Guess that could be tree too. Oh.
Once upon a time, and as the heads rolled,
Blade.
the valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Once upon a time, the Mulgrins
Go
lived
slower.
in peace. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew.
Maybe I was going too quickly.
The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Intriguing.
Let's do this one.
The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley. Once upon a time, the Mulgrins lived in peace. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Once upon a time, the Mulgrins lived in peace. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Intriguing. Didn't make no sense.
It's gotta be out of order. Okay, let's try something different. It's the first one.
Once upon a time, the Mulgrins lived in peace. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley. Once upon a time, the Mulgrins lived in peace. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. And as the heads roll, the time of the Mulgrim begins anew. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading.
Should be right. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. According to the pictures. We have a fire. So obviously that one's a start because it's Once Upon a Time. And then it goes to this. It looks just like this one. Then we have that blade right there, so that's number 3. And I've tried both these two. It's got a tree. Looks like a tree at least. And then the last one looks like this. So I don't know why this flame keeps going either.
Once upon a time, peace ended with a violent somebodies invaded to try again. Once upon a time, and as the heads arose, the valley was taken, but then began the battle. The battle ended with that ain't edible. The story needs to be just right. Once upon a time, and as the heads arose, the valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Intriguing. Peace ended with a violent, growing impatient and hungry. Try a different order.
Try a different order.
Peace ended, and as the heads arose, the valley was taken, but then began the battle. The battle ended with a great peace ended with a violent. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Once upon a time, growing impatient and hungry. Try a different order.
Well, I'm trying the pictures, so
Peace ended with a violent somebodies invaded the valley.
so they're telling their story, like they're the good ones. So it's not the okay.
The battle ended with a great gruesome beheading.
So that's probably the last one. That's the first one.
Peace ended with a violent somebodies invaded the valley. And as the heads roll, the time of the Milgram begins anew. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Intriguing.
To try a different order. So
Once upon a time, the peace ended with a violent. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. And as the heads of that's not the way the story goes. Molgrins lived in peace. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley. And as the heads roll, the time of the Molgrim begins anew. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Once upon a time, the Molgrins lived in peace. The valley was taken, but then began the... And as the heads roll, the time of the Molgrins... Peace ended with the... And as the heads... The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Once upon a time, the Molgrins lived in peace. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley. Once upon a time, the Molgrins lived in peace. And as the heads roll, the time of the Molgrim began. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded the valley. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Intriguing. And as the heads roll, the time of the Molgrim begins anew. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading.
That's not it.
The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. Intriguing. Growing impatient and hungry, try a different... Once upon a time, the Molgrins lived in peace. Peace ended when the violent somebodies invaded. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. The valley was taken, but then didn't make no sense again. Once upon a time, peace ended with the battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. The valley was not the way the story went. Once upon a time, peace ended. The valley was taken, but then began the battle of the bodies. The battle ended with a great, gruesome beheading. For time immemorial, the Molgrims had lived in the valley in peace, sharing good eatings and howlings around their fire, which they had inherited from the skies. Then one terrible night came the violent somebodies. They hunted the Mogrims for sport and took their fire for themselves. But the somebodies knew not what they were dealing with, for as soon as they held the fire in their grubby hands, they began to fight one another with it. To save themselves from themselves, the cunning heads turned on their bodies and organized a great beheading. And so it was that some bodies became nobodies, and the bodies were exiled. A time of peace would ensue, or so the headlings thought. The last living Mogrim had been biding her time, and saw now an opportunity to return and take bloody vengeance upon the heads, who were now left defenseless without their bodies. Time of the Mogrim begins anew. A storied meal indeed. Moonbird thanks you for feeding her and proudly upholds the promise. A gift. A shard from the Mogrim's own cauldron. It looked so shiny in the moonlight. Moonbird simply had to take it.
One shard of the moon and its power. It wants to return to the Mogrim's cauldron.
For now, she'll see you in the light.
Nice. So I guess we're not skipping puzzles. I think we're doing okay. Seems like we did bypass a couple things though. Unless we're gonna go back to them later. Maybe it all ties in later on. Okay, so we're back here. Good. So we need to put that piece in the cauldron. See if we can find it real quick.
She's here!
Okay, there's that. There it is.
Watch out! She sees us.
There, we got 2 pieces. Good. All right. Let's continue this tomorrow. Thanks for... Oh, there we go. Thanks for stopping by and watching me play this. We'll play a little bit early tomorrow and continue this story. See how it goes. So thanks for watching. Have a good night, and I'll see you guys later. Thank you. Bye.